All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming. So we have a panel with some great VCs here and allocators in the space. So I do love philosophical, abstract discussions about safety and open source and all this, but I'm going to try and make this as actionable as possible and sort of get the perspective from the field. And by the way, my name's Jose. I accept Jose, but not Josie. Josie's one step too far for me, so yeah, Jose or Jose is fine. So I want to start with a question about venture generally. So Roelof Botha, who is the leader of Sequoia, one of the most legendary funds, probably the most legendary fund of all time, recently said he thinks venture is a return-free risk right now. That there's a huge problem with the venture industry. There's only 20 companies per year that are generating $1 billion or more in realized exits, and yet there's 150 to 200 billion a year invested in venture. There's a lot more talent than interesting ideas or companies to be built, and we're spreading talent too thin, and he compared it to 1999, right before the tech bubble. So from my perspective, I kind of, it seems like I actually disagree with him, which is a risky place to be, but I'm curious what you all think. It just seems like this vintage should be way better, because in 2020, we were funding sort of like SaaS apps and dog walking CRMs, and now we're doing like deep tech and chips and fabs and all this stuff. So I'm curious, what do you all think? Maybe we can start with Casey, because I know you have a good answer for this.
Yeah, I'm happy to opine on this. So I feel very privileged that I recently went on a walk with Neil from Green Oaks, and people that are unfamiliar, it's one of the most iconic funds right now, and I've done just absolutely stellar. And we had this exact conversation. And what he said and what I've come to agree with is that it's gonna be more power law even than other vintages. So most people are gonna lose money, and that's because there's so much noise. There is so many companies. I mean, if I did a tweet of our pipeline internally over the last 2 years, it has just skyrocketed during the AI revolution, and it's just because more people feel empowered to go start companies, and so you're just seeing a lot of shit. At the same time, to your point, the companies that are gonna work extremely well, and that's how these bigger funds are underwriting doing seed rounds at $1 billion. Like, we see those every week. Maybe not every week, but at least once a month, and very, very strong talent density going out and raising at prices that would never make sense even 2 decades ago. And Neil's point was that a $1 trillion company in 2010 wasn't really possible. Maybe you had one, right? Now we have over 11 companies that are worth $1 trillion or more. And so from that vantage point, you really can underwrite these businesses growing to places that are unprecedented. And so my hope is, at least, I mean, for everyone up here, we're all hoping we can be in the 5% that deliver incredible returns, and not the 95% of funds that probably are going to be below 1x.
Who wants to go next?
Yeah, why not? I mean, I think that's largely right. Like Bill Gurley says that, VC is not a home runs business, it's a grand slams business. And there definitely are still gonna be grand slams, which means some minority percentage of VC funds are just gonna perform extremely well. But VC is, like, overall historically kind of an underperforming asset class as it is. And I think just, the bottom half will get washed out, or maybe more than the bottom half. But I agree, Jose, not Josie, with what you said, which is like, it kind of doesn't feel, I don't think 1999 is a great analogy, because like none of the companies in 1999 had any revenue, right? Like, people say like, oh, the labs are so overvalued, it's so frothy, and it's like, I don't know, Anthropic just raised at like 35x revenue, having grown ARR 5x this year, and like they're kind of building God. Like, to me, 35x kind of feels cheap for that. So like there are pockets of craziness. Like, we see so many seed rounds where people are like, hey, it's me and my friend, we've got a laptop, we're raising, we're expecting like 100 posts, and we're collecting term sheets in the next 24 hours, so like, let us know, and that to me is just like, the worst, the worst position to be in. But at the same time, great companies are gonna raise at valuations that kind of have you scratching your head and saying like, okay, it feels expensive, but if it really, really works, it's gonna be huge.
No disagreements on my side with either of those. Just speaking on kind of Roelof's point as a frame, I thought it was also interesting because he was kind of commenting on venture capital as an asset class as a whole. And I feel like most of us up here probably practice venture in a way that's different than like the majority of the capital being deployed. I think a lot of funds have expanded dramatically. A lot of the capital going into these businesses are coming from vehicles that look very different. I think early stage venture probably, is still kind of practiced the same way. I mean, Roloff made all those comments. He's still deploying in the same way he's deploying, and so I don't know. I fully agree with you that the prize is large, the power law will be more extreme, and also if you actually look at what you'd change as an allocator, you're still going to try to back great entrepreneurs working on interesting ideas at the early stages.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Well, I guess I will. So I agree with a lot of what's been said, but to play contrarian, I do think that we're going towards a drastically new direction as it relates to how companies are being built, and I do think at this type of a paradigm shift, there will be opportunities for new types of capital. At times I do believe that the term venture capital is getting too large. There's too many different types of ways that people like to play the game of venture capital. But I think that there's some of the slower growing companies that are still going to be generating tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of annual revenue could still be interesting to different forms of capital. So I do agree that we're now, like Jensen Wong actually said, in a game of $10 trillion companies. OpenAI, he said OpenAI has probably the best chance of being the first $10 trillion company, which is massive, right? So venture is always going to be the game for the multi-trillion-dollar now bets, but there's going to be other ways savvy investors can make money today with new, nuanced AI native companies, I believe.
I did think one other point that Roloff made, which you touched on, was around talent and talent getting spread too thin. I was curious if you guys had thoughts on that topic. I have some.
Talent density?
Yeah, I think Roloff was making the point that he feels like there's so many startups, talent is being spread way too thin across all of them, and there's not enough density.
What do you think?
I don't know. I think, like, if anything, I kind of felt like the inverse was true in some ways, where you have, like, a lot of people being pulled in from all walks of education into a specific sector and specific types of businesses. And so I felt the opposite, but it was interesting that he made that point.
It kind of feels like the kind of problem that markets are good at solving, right? It's like talent will naturally flow to companies that are performing well. And maybe at the very earliest stages it feels spread thin, but I don't know. I feel like this is the kind of thing markets are good at allocating.
Yeah, maybe 2 points on that. We pay a lot of attention to engineers and that specific cohort of talent, and we are just seeing so much consolidation, actually, where the labs are willing to pay absolutely ludicrous salaries. Even one of our companies this week got an acquisition offer to offer the founder $10 million cash as a salary. He's a 24-year-old kid. He's a really smart engineer, but I mean, these are just prices that I'm sure everyone in the room, including myself, that's insane. And then, so I actually think the reverse. I see engineering talent consolidating because of that. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which might be interesting, is graduation rates. I think that one thing that's unknown in venture right now is that graduation rates from seed to Series A are actually lower in this vintage than previous vintages, which means that fewer companies are getting to that stage. And it just kind of fortifies the point of a lot of companies actually aren't making it and going to zero, and the few that are making incredible returns.
But on the consolidation point, if talent is consolidating at the big labs, is that not another negative towards venture, and that you're getting some negative selection of the people that are left over, or the ones that aren't worth the $10 million or $100 million salaries?
Yeah, you can make that point, but the antithesis would be the two other points, which is one, you need fewer people to build. Like, we have a company with 2 people that does $1 million in ARR. I've never seen that before, actually, personally. And so there's fewer people needed. And then I would also say still the very, 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 very top people, if they're at the right arc in their life, are willing to take a gamble. But I totally hear your point, and I think that's valid.
Any other thoughts on that from anyone else?
It's hard to hire somebody who has an offer from an OpenAI, right? They just have, even if it's not a $10 million offer, right? Like a junior-ish person is oh great, I'm gonna make $500K a year, and then I'm gonna have equity that's worth another, several $1 million. And if I think it's going to 10 trillion, maybe it's worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And then meanwhile, this company just raised, a $8 million seed from a great VC fund. But how much can they really pay me? So it's hard.
Interesting. So I think this leads us on nicely to the next question, actually, which is, so obviously everyone who's here, up here or at this conference, have some level of interest in open source or distributed AI, right? So maybe to start with, can everyone just define what dAGI or distributed AI or truly open AI means to you? You can say why you're interested in it from a sort of philosophical or ethical perspective, but I'd also want you to kind of focus on the investment case, because in the world we live in now, obviously, with capitalism, it's not enough to think that something should be the case. You have to have the market incentives to make it the case. So, yeah, and you want to start?
Sure. I think, at the extreme, a lot of the large labs are building towards AGI, ASI, some concept of superintelligence. And I guess just from sort of the safety lens, but also just sort of the market participation lens, the worst number of AGIs to have is 1, the second worst to have is 0, and then the third worst is, incrementally more. And so the more we have, the better. And so I think, honestly, the state of play is so much better than it was 2 years ago. There's probably 10 reasonably sized labs working on, with great researchers working on interesting problems, whereas maybe 2 or 3 2.5 years ago. And so I think we'll keep progressing in that direction. And so I think it's really positive. Also, the other thing is from a philosophical lens, I look at it slightly more with the optimistic one, which is we want to explore the possible frontier as much as possible. And I look at decentralized AI and open AI, open comma AI, as as a way to just explore that possible frontier to its fullest extent. And I think Topology and USV are both investors in a company called Pluralis, which I can talk about later. But the way I look at it is it's not necessarily trying to be open in terms of open weights, but it's trying to be open in terms of open participation. And that lets us explore the possible frontier more. So that's kind of, I think.
Yeah, I think I've just become convinced in the last year that we are going to live in this multipolar, many powerful AIs world, which I think is directionally good. I got dinner with your business partner Albert, and he said the exact same line of the worst number of AGIs is 1. I think that's true, but just to take the contrarian stance on that, if we already know from model cards from OpenAI and Anthropic that their existing models open up a bunch of security vulnerabilities, right? They can be used for offensive cyber attacks. They make it easier for relative amateurs to create bioweapons. And so if we create truly open models, is that that are hyper powerful, say open AGI that sort of anybody can use and anybody can post-train to be really good at anything they want, is that tantamount to putting a bioweapons laboratory or a nuclear bomb in the hand of every human? I don't think that's a reason to stop building open source models and to sort of stop this movement, but it is a thing we're going to have to reckon with and grapple with. And so the things that I think are actually going to be huge businesses are the businesses that solve those safety and trust and security issues, because we just know from the Fortune 500 right now, security is a prerequisite for deployment. If you're going to deploy a tool that really opens up genuine security concerns for your business or for the world, it's just not going to work. So yeah, that's sort of me talking my book, because it's what we invest in. But yeah, I think it's just going to be a huge part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think, for me, in terms of the case for open and decentralization, it comes down to control and influence. And, I think right now the momentum is all towards centralization. But I'm curious to see, what could happen with a more open and decentral framework and protocols applied. And, looking at, things from the past as potentially, what could come in the future, right? Cloud computing is built on the backs of open source, right? And so what can we learn from Linux? What can we learn from some of the greats in the past to see, can decentralization, can open be applied to this new agentic economy that I think, on the stage we're all excited to see that come to be.
Okay, so you good?
Good.
Okay. Yeah, I resonate with the sentiment for sure. I think for me, like many others, was kind of writing think pieces about this when AI came out for open source and decentralized and why it makes sense. And personally, for the last 2 years, I've been kind of disappointed with the state of play. I mean, open source has definitely progressed a lot, but we're literally reliant on the most unlikely hero of all time, China, for our open source models. I think all the agentic economy that people posited, like we're very far from that. I don't see that many teams building in this space either in terms of the talented teams. They're mostly working on centralized stuff or robotics or things like this. And obviously there's the competition with the hyperscalers for talent and then competing with centralized startups for talent. Seems like there's some negative selection, but I'm curious, am I jaded? Or are you seeing the same thing, or is there a reason to be hopeful? And maybe if you want, you can mention like a specific project that you're really excited about in the space. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I'm seeing some glimmers, but I mean, I think like you said in this prompt for this question, a lot of the action is still around centralization, the larger AI research labs. But there are some builders out there. Like I have a portfolio company called Prompt Driven Development that's making prompts the central source of truth for code development. It's a new coding infrastructure product, and it's has an open source component where developers are contributing to this new framework, this new philosophy. Right, and so I think that if you can create, and I think communities are an important moat today, and will continuously be an important moat. So if you can build a strong community around you that truly believes in the vision that you're setting out to do, right, then I think you want to try to capture that value. And I think that's still within, that's still an important aspect of contributing to an open source project. So I do see like bits and pieces, there's definitely glimmers, but I do think that right now the lion's share, the momentum, is all with the more centralized approaches.
Anyone else? I know USV has a big take around, or thesis around permissionless innovation. Are you seeing a lot of that? Like, are you seeing interesting projects in that space? You mentioned Pluralis, I guess.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. I think it's reasonable. I think your prompt is reasonable that we often, people in the crypto space at least, have these grand visions of kind of how the world will operate. And I think the commercial forces of AI and of enterprise software generally are very centralizing. And so I think that's also true. I think inevitably though, I think AI is going to be developed. And is going to progress from contributions from many places. And I think, like I was talking about Pluralis, I think that's one good example. I can try to think of other ones. Pluralis basically lets anyone, in theory, propose a model run, anyone propose a data set, and anyone contribute compute to that model run. And you earn a stake in the models proportional to the amount of compute you provide. And then those models can monetize, you can run inference against them, and then you can earn your share of the profit. And the models are still closed weight, but it's at least open participation. And if you're a researcher, if you have an interesting novel idea for a frontier model, and you want it to be a large scale model, and you can't afford to stand up a bunch of GPUs on your own, you can come to Pluralis and say, hey, actually train this model for me, and you'll earn a share. And so I think it's like, it's still a very early project, but it's a very interesting take on how do we make part of the stack more open. And then like on the flip side, you have businesses like Reflection, which kind of raise a bunch of money. And they have a different take on how you kind of make the ecosystem more open, which is you actually develop fully open source models and you try to monetize them by making them custom for their consumers. So I think openness will present itself continuously throughout the stack in different ways.
Jose, can I ask you, because like I feel like you've thought about this a ton, like why hasn't it emerged? Like why haven't open models and open source emerged as like anywhere close to say like where OpenAI or Anthropic is at? Is it just because like the consolidating market effects mean that like you can just capture more value if you're building closed models, or is it just like an accident of history that's the sort of direction that the world took? Like why isn't it happening?
On the model side, I'm actually like pleasantly surprised, I'd say. Like if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said open source would have been way more behind than it is now. And I think that's just because for China, if you're behind, it sort of pays to open source, right? Like
Or
the whole,
Facebook.
huh? Or Facebook.
Or if you're
yeah.
Facebook, yeah.
You want to just commoditize your compliments,
Yeah.
right? And get people using your stack and make
Yeah.
sure that you don't end up in a situation where you're dependent on someone else's.
Yeah.
So I think that's fortunate. It will probably always, that dynamic will probably always be the case, and I underestimated it. So I think that's playing out. I just think all the rest of the stuff that we put in our thought pieces and stuff, I think hasn't really, I haven't seen it play out at least. I mean, there's interesting things being built and like experiments and stuff, but the speed of those and like the talent going into them compared to the centralized stuff, and it's like many orders of magnitude, at least from my, I'm not as deep here on the ground as you, so I'm very curious. Casey, I know you wanted to say something. Do you agree?
There's a few things. I have 3 points to say. The first is, one thing just worth knowing is that OpenAI last week decided they were going to allow adult content. That is a huge decision on their part. Facebook, when forever had very similar decision to make and ultimately decided not to allow it ever. And Sam coming forward and saying, we see this as a use case, we see this as a application of this technology, and we're going to allow it, is something that I think the organization was very split on, and I don't think people are really talking about it, and I think it's just a really interesting thing, especially for this ecosystem.
What does that mean? You'll be able to generate like porn on OpenAI?
Maybe not images yet, but in copy, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And that's a huge, like if you call your open source model friends, that's the primary use case. And so it's really going to be interesting to see over the next few months what that does for open source volume. This is the first thing I wanted to call out in terms of Sam actually starting to kind of move closer to us. The second thing I wanted to say was that to answer the question of why it hasn't really panned out, we are all just still so AI curious. All of us. Like, even though ChatGPT has been around for 3 years, I still think our whole society and our whole species is still thinking at the edge of, oh my gosh, what is this going to do for us? And what that actually materializes as is us all wanting to use the cutting edge, and that's why we're all still using ChatGPT, because every week they release new features, and it's not worth using something that's more cost effective. Think about it. Like, you want to keep using ChatGPT because you want your life to be as more productive and gain the 1% more on this technology, and that spans to enterprises too. And so I think that as we adapt to this technology, that will start to shift. But until we plateau with this technology, that's just a dynamic that we have to figure out. And then I'm curious, please argue back if you don't think that's true. And then the final thing I just wanted to say was I think we shot ourselves in the foot with having this peak and trough with dAI. I think the personality tokens were super negative for the space. I think a lot of people got burned with it. I think it reminded everyone of the meme coin stuff. And I just think it was really unfortunate how that played out.
On the last bit, what are you referring to on the person?
Yeah, just the fact that the personality agents with GOAT and all of that and how that went. And I think that was to your question of like, why aren't we a little bit further? And then to your question of where the best projects are. I mean, you called out Pluralis, OpenMind. I think the CEO is in the room now, somewhere. Amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, incredible projects. There are amazing projects still being built in this category, but they're few and far between.
I think the thing you said about enterprise adoption is actually pretty important too, because like enterprises are just like boring, big, giant organizations that are extremely bureaucratic and have like 1,000 lawyers and there's very complex procurements departments, and they just need like all of these assurances, and they kind of want to buy. Nobody gets fired for hiring IBM, is like the old phrase, right? And so I feel like the centralized labs, and especially like I think Anthropic has done a particularly good job of being like, we're the safe, secure one that will like, you won't feel bad for buying us, and your like head of procurement won't get in trouble, and like your CISO won't get in trouble. And so I think, yeah, like sorry to be a bit of a broken record on like the security is upstream of deployment front, but yeah, I just think it's like so true. So if open source projects or open projects in general want to get enterprise deployment, like they're just going to have to figure it out.
Yeah, I think it was a great point on progress having to slow down before more of the stuff becomes relevant, right? Because also if progress slows down, then there's kind of more of a reason to optimize for cost, right? Rather than having to be at the frontier. And I think once you start optimizing for cost, then like fine-tuned open source models and all that starts to make way more sense. So I think that's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
Well, can I just get one thing in on? So on the point about enterprises, like, so all the builders in the room, I think it's important for you to really be thinking and be very thoughtful about how are you going to build relationships with the enterprises that are in your space, right? Like, can you create a relationship that allows you to impress upon them the quality of your technology, them being enterprises in your space, so that you can increase the adoption curve, right? So I think that's going to be one of the big challenges you all are going to have to face, because if you're not able to get the enterprise, you might just stay kind of in a smaller growth story, hobbyist type of a place, right?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, the other thing I was going to just add was, enterprise when it comes to projects that in the back end are community oriented or a protocol or are decentralized in some form, has been like a long-standing problem in crypto, because in order to attract community and talent and capital, you need to highlight kind of the more decentralized and open parts of your business. But in order to serve a customer, they don't care about any of that. And if anything, talking about that's a negative. And so there's always been kind of this like tension or hard thing to reconcile in the internals of a lot of these businesses, which is like, how do we build up a team that can go serve customers, do sales or do ground up go to market, but like have great enterprise SLAs. But also on the other side of this business, the reason we're structurally advantaged in serving this tool is because we're decentralized and we're taking a more, maybe it's token incentivized network or something like that. And so I think that's like a real challenge. And I think as more teams have spent time in crypto and left and come back to it, I think you'll see teams that are are able to do these sides of the house together very well and do it natively from the jump.
Do you think it's more likely that because of like the difficulty in these community-based or decentralized projects, the difficulty in meeting these like enterprise SLAs, that the big breakout winners are more likely to be consumer things?
My instinct is yes, in some ways. I do think there are a number of interesting businesses. Well, I'll get to the consumer question. I think there's a number of interesting businesses on the crypto side, or like the decentralized AI side, where they are potentially structurally advantaged in the thing they're providing. I was talking about Pluralis. It's not like you can do this model in a different way. It's not like OpenAI is going to source compute in the way that Pluralis is. There's like projects out there, not an investor, but there's a project out there called Grass, and they have a bunch of peered nodes around the world, and that's kind of who's doing their indexing for them. And that's kind of structurally advantaged versus an Nexa or Parallel in some ways. And so I do think if that structural advantage presents itself and grows, then eventually you'll just have a cheaper, faster service, and that will allow you to win. So I'm not giving up on the enterprise for these decentralized AI businesses. That said, I do think consumer is probably going to be the first place it takes off. I don't think that's going to be in chat though. I think ChatGPT is going to be absolutely dominant, and I think even as we become less crypto curious, as Casey mentioned, I still think chat's going to be dominant for a bunch of reasons. They'll make the product free. It'll be a known default. They'll be able to monetize via ads, and for all the reasons they've grown today, they'll continue to grow. They're just a really powerful brand.
So what would it be in consumer then, if not chat?
You want to start?
Go ahead.
I think, I don't know how familiar people are with the market, but companions already have insane product market fit. I started talking to this company last week that went from 0 to 2.5 million in revenue in 6 months. And they are AI companions, and they target a specific ICP, and they nail it. They just nail the
What is a
speech.
companion, like the Elon anime girlfriend things?
Yeah. Yeah, but not that exact cohort, but basically. And so I think companions are going to continue to work. I think it's an extremely interesting ethical question, because if you query Americans, I think the average number of friends is like 1.3. Wow. And I think if you ask psychologists, it's something like you need 7. And Mark Zuckerberg did an amazing podcast about how he wants to close that gap. And I don't think it's going to be Mark, but I think he's right. I think AI is going to close the gap.
I'm kind of curious. Could you prosumer that? Could you have a companion in more of an enterprise-friendly direction and take advantage? And can you use that motion then to maybe get more enterprise adoption?
Yeah, maybe.
Like the Microsoft paperclip, but
Clip.
with kind of sexy.
I mean, I think we can all agree that was like a lame execution, right? But
That's an idea for you out there.
Wow,
Microsoft
sexy
Paperclip,
Clippy,
but
oh
kind
my
of sexy. Okay. Yeah, I also think. Oh, sorry, did you want to add something else?
Oh, I was just going to agree with Casey that I think companions are fascinating. Also interestingly structurally advantaged in the sense that OpenAI might try to launch a product here, but people want. There's so many different never-ending niches within the population, and we've spent time with businesses that were specifically just for 15 to 17-year-old girls, and in the U.S. or products that are just targeting 26 to 28-year-old males in some other pocket.
But why wouldn't it be like a GPT in that case? Like if you're a developer and you want the maximum reach, why not build it as a GPT?
I guess I'm not saying it's going to be like a chat-based interface, but I'm just saying I don't think the large labs are going to be advantaged in serving that.
Interesting.
I think they might be though. So I think that these companies are maybe more likely to be like wrappers that are around like Claude and OpenAI models, just because we see over and over again with this quote unquote the bitter lesson of if you just keep throwing more compute and more data at building the models, you just become way more performant than anything else. And so, yeah, I think that's right. There will be branded companies that have consumer products that are the cool thing to talk to if you're a 17-year-old girl or whatever, or an aging person, looking for companionship. But yeah, I can't see those companies actually building base level frontier models that are anywhere as good as the big labs.
Nice. Yeah, and then to add to I think why it's hard, building things in a decentralized way is really difficult. It's difficult enough to build a startup. Trying to do it decentralized is an uphill battle, and I think the main benefit of decentralization is when you don't want something to change, right? And that's why it's so valuable in Bitcoin and in lending and DeFi. But I think in startups, it's actually the highest change environment you can have, and decentralization is very poorly adapted to that. But so I want to touch on AI safety a little bit. I know, Mike, this is something you spend a lot of time on. And I think most people agree AI safety is important, regardless of where you sit on the spectrum. I think anyone, even Mark Andreessen, if you pressed him, would agree that it's important. The thing is, like I said before, these things only happen if there are kind of market-based incentives for them to happen, right? And you've started a fund that's very much focused actually on investing it in this space. So I think for most people, they would probably initially be surprised to know that there's a big investment opportunity here. Can you maybe, and I'd love for all the others to jump in, especially if you have hot takes to disagree.
Yeah, I'll tell you my takes, and then you guys should tell me why I'm wrong. So yeah, look, I mean, if you go down in San Francisco or Sand Hill Road and you polled 20 VCs, how many of you are interested in quote unquote AI safety? I think most of them would be nah, not really, or I don't know, But if you just skipped the phrase AI safety and spoke specifically about the actual technologies and companies that are needed to make the world safe and secure as AI continues to expand like crazy, they are super interested in it, right? So if you said, okay, well, enterprises can't deploy agents because they're super concerned about all these security and liability concerns. So are you interested in insurance products that address those liability concerns and reduce those risks and allow people to actually deploy the tools they want to deploy? VCs are like, yeah, for sure. And we invested in a company doing that, and it got backed by Nat Friedman and Emergence, some of the best investors you could hope for. Or you said, hey, are you interested in ultra-secure compute, right? Especially if you're a highly regulated industry or the government, where we know that nation-state level actors are trying to hack into the labs and hack into the large data centers all the time. VCs would say yes, we're super interested in that. So we just invested in a company doing that with First Round, right? Or are you interested in all sorts of other cybersecurity or hardware security use cases? So yeah, I just think there's a huge natural market. Again, broken record here, but security and safety is just upstream of deployment. If your tools are generally genuinely going to cause issues there, you just can't use them. Okay, so now tell me why I'm wrong.
No, I think those are great points. I think where my head went when you asked this question was the early waves of AI safety discussion was a lot around interpretability, actually understanding these black boxes that we've created, these magical black boxes. And I'm curious to what extent you think like that vector of AI safety matters, and whether you guys are investing behind that.
Yeah, totally. So we helped start a company called Goodfire, which is an interpretability lab. So they've hired a bunch of the best people from like DeepMind and Anthropic, sort of who've led this interpretability space. And yeah, interpretability, roughly speaking, is we can't really see inside the black box. We know what the input is, what should I have for dinner tonight? We know what the output is, pizza, but why did it say pizza, right? And so this has a bunch of implications both for like getting models to perform better. It also has massive implications for being able to query the model, right? Okay, maybe it's something that's higher stakes than pizza or hamburgers. It's like, do I have breast cancer, right? And if the model says, yes, you have cancer, you want to be able to interrogate the model and say, well, like, why do you think that? Like, which clusters of neurons fired to say that it is or is not cancer? And did you go through any sort of reasoning process, or did you sort of consider other things, right? And so interp like really opens up that space. And then finally, just from like a pure like safety perspective, if you can do interp and say, okay, when the model is telling somebody how to create a bioweapon, it's because these clusters of neurons are firing in these ways. So if we can sort of downregulate those neurons in these ways and sort of do brain surgery on the model, we'll actually just make it way less likely that it's going to say that dangerous thing. That said, this is like a huge Pandora's box because these technologies are dual use, right? Like if you can downregulate the model or the neurons to make the model less likely to do the dangerous thing, you could just upregulate the neurons to make the model much more likely to do the dangerous thing. And so, like just developing these technologies doesn't like solve the problem. You have to put like really good governance schemes around them, and we have to figure out ways to sort of stay defense dominant so that we don't, we don't use them for ill.
That makes a lot of sense. That's cool you're investing behind it. The related question I had for you was, Anthropic, the founding myth of the company was AI safety. People came out of OpenAI and they wanted to, build systems that were slightly more interpretable and safe. And of course, they've kind of just they've done some interesting work there, but mostly kind of ignored that in the pursuit of becoming one of the leading labs. And Dario has kind of explained that away by saying, in order to pursue the goal of safety, we need to be one of the key players in the arena.
Right.
And I'm curious if one, you buy that argument, and if two, you would extend that argument to, if you do buy it, to other startups. Like if you are, Sierra and doing customer support, or if you're any of these downstream businesses, and who's going to be the most, guardrail safe version of a customer support agent? Maybe it is just the business that is working on that problem.
I think that's the argument against safety is that it's sort of like a cost center, right,
Mm-hmm.
to some extent. And but yeah, I'm curious what you would say to that. And also initially when I spoke to you, I was like, aren't the labs just going to internalize this? Curious what you'd say to both of those.
There's so much there. I could talk about this for an hour, but I won't. But yeah, just really quickly, Anthropic is always branded as like the safe one, and I think it's just really good branding for them. I genuinely think they do care. Like I think Dario and the founding team and a bunch of the executives there like genuinely think that making sure that AGI is safe is like the most important thing humanity will ever do, and that's their mission. That said, like incentives are real, and their bargain is like, look, we cannot work to make frontier AI safe if we're not building at the frontier. And then the question is like, at some point, do you realize the thing you're not building isn't safe, and then you stop building it, or you delay releasing your products, and at that point you fall behind OpenAI, and then you die as a company, and then you can no longer pursue your great safety research. So it's this like weird sort of like bargain or tension that they have. I think they're very well intentioned, but incentives are just like a real thing. What was your question on are the labs just going to do everything? I think the labs are going to do a lot, but I would say, look, just I don't know if you look at like the cybersecurity world or like the cyber insurance world, right? There's just like always going to be third parties who are solving really important parts of the equation. Or like you look at evaluations of AI models, right? Like the companies that come in and say, okay, like what are this model's capabilities actually? What can it do? What is it good at? What is it not so good at? What are the risks inherent in the model? Like that really can't be the lab. I mean, the labs will do that work, but you will just need third-party evaluators to make sure the labs aren't grading their own homework. So the labs are going to do a lot, and I think it's actually likely that a bunch of our portfolio companies will get bought by the labs because they'll be doing something really interesting that the labs realize like they need to internalize and do. And so it's going to be a mix.
All right, I think we're running over. Maybe we have 5 minutes for final question. You have a question?
I do have a question.
All right, let's go with your question then.
It's not often you get a chance to see 5 venture capitalists sitting across from you. I joined my first venture company in 1978, and I would venture to say that the least changed industry since then has been the VC industry. The 2% management fee and the 20% carry has like consistently stayed through 50 years. How each of you think that AI is going to change your business?
Good question.
Yeah, I don't agree with Mark and Andreessen that like we're the last ones to get automated. I think ventures are like AI is already better at me at many parts of my job. Haven't made a single investment in the last 18 months where I haven't spent considerable time discussing it with AI. I think the way we see it is like at the end game, if you sort of, I do think there's something about picking founders and like the instinct and the sort of muscle memory that you need to really identify someone that's special, and that's sort of the core generalizable skill of venture. And I think it's going to be hard for AI to do that. But like, yeah, I think everything else basically, like I think humans will basically kind of be data collectors for AI. We'll do these calls and like and meet with the founders and stuff, and then we'll feed all the data to an AI, which will tell us whether we should invest or not. Like, I really think that the end game, if you pull it up far enough, is something like that. And even like all the work, the post-investment work, the intros, the support, like especially intros, like you'd be surprised how much of my week is like introing various people to each other, and like AI is way better at me than that. You know, it can do it in 1 second, much better than I can. So I do think a lot of our job, and it's actually something we think about and are working on a lot. I think a lot of our job gets automated, and also just once you have an internal knowledge base with all the companies you've ever spoken to, every founder you've ever spoken to, any company they mentioned, and that's just going to be a very different line of work. But yeah, very curious to hear.
I would agree. You know, at its core, venture is a relationships business, and so like there will always be a human component. But if you deconstruct the functions of a venture firm, there's a lot of manual activities, a lot of manual functions that can be automated. And when that happens, I do think that you'll see, some of the, the standard, kind of terms, structures, costs will be different.
At a firm I used to work at named Bessemer, which is one of the, you probably know it, one of the older standing VC firms in the world, actually. They have something called the anti-portfolio, and it's the companies they didn't invest in and they missed. And at Topology, we're doing something in the mind of that, which is an AI portfolio. And so we have this agent that every time we're on the line of an investment, we let it decide if we should have or shouldn't invested. I make the decisions in Fund 1, but we will look back in Fund 2, and if it is better than me, maybe, because I want to see, I'm just curious exactly what you said. I mean, these are arguably less biased than we are and are less recency bias, and I'm just so interested to see the portfolio that they're able to build.
Yeah, there's actually one point that's relevant here, because I used to play poker, and this was back sort of 10 years ago when the bots weren't that good, but every good player I knew at the time trained up a bot, and these bots were like way worse than you as a player. Like they were very simple. They were definitely like way worse than you on your A game, but in almost every case they outperformed you just because they didn't tilt, right? They played the same every time. They didn't have bad days, they didn't get tired. And I think about that a lot with venture. How many calls do I take where I'm like in the car, I just woke up on the wrong side of the bed and I miss like some greatness that I should have caught. So I don't think they need to be better than you at your peak to still outperform you at the average,
One thing though is like a little bit of a contrarian take is like most of the stuff we've talked about is about picking, right? Like which company should I invest in? But a lot of venture, especially if you're like going after the most competitive deals, is about winning, right? Because like most of the most competitive, like the best deals are all like 10x oversubscribed, right? So like why is the founder gonna want to work with you versus somebody else? And that to me feels like a very relationship oriented thing. That said, like often what you're selling to founders is like the value add, right? Like what can we do to help you? And so I think VCs can use AI tools to be like, hey, here's a bunch of like resources that we give to founders, and here's our AI tools that like make it really valuable to work with us. And so I'm really interested not just in like how AI helps with picking, but how it helps with winning and actually helping your companies.
All right, I think we gotta end it there.
Hey, Jose. Can we please give a big, big round of applause to everybody?